You heard me on the web show, The Cavalcade of the Mind. Now find out the rest of the story.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Pleased to be here and pleased to have you along today. We want to continue a series that we created a little bit ago in partnership with the Stair Step Foundation. I'm pleased to announce and present as my co-host for today my dear friend Alfred Babington Johnson. He leads the Stair Step Initiative. Today's program is about the second in a series of town hall meetings on the MnDOT I-94 Highway 252 project. I'll say that properly. It's properly called the Highway 252 I-94 EIS. It's a development improvement discussed and being planned for Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, North Minneapolis. We're talking about that today. Brother Babington, good afternoon. Good to see you again. How are you? You have to unmute.
I'm doing nicely, my brother. Good to see you as well.
Well, thank you for being here. And for our listeners on KFAI, we've been doing this important work of trying to create engagement and awareness about important transportation issues for North Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park. And we are pleased to have a wonderful relationship with leaders at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And I am pleased to have a partnership with the Stair Step Initiative. Babington, let me have you begin this by informing our readers once again about the vision and work of Stair Step and how we've come to this forum on transportation.
Well, Al, for Stair Step, the notion is that we're coming after the key issue of our times, and we consider that to be the breakdown of community. And when we talk about community, we're talking about the way people relate to one another. We actually define community as the way people behave when they believe they belong together. I think that makes a difference in how we interact. And without that, we're kind of living in a time and when the inertia, that is to say, the energy of our times, is leading us into siloed positions, us against them sort of operations in our thinking and in our doing. And so Stair Step is really focused on trying to rebuild the spirit of community, particularly among African American people, although the issue is a universal one. And it kind of really flows, Al, into this conversation we've had and are having with the community and with MnDOT. And the idea is, you know, there was a Maya Angelou quote, Al, one time. It said that I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Well, the point of that is clarity, information, education helps us to operate in our own interests in ways that we can't if we don't know, if we don't have the information. And so this project, which really stirs me on several levels, is an opportunity to try to help the conversation become more substantive, more meaningful between an institution that is serving the community, in this case, MnDOT, and the community itself. I think many times African Americans and African people in America think that decisions are made that don't have our input. And sometimes that's because those who are doing things are really in a let sleeping dogs lie kind of posture. You know, it's easier to do things without a lot of input. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that the community itself isn't forceful enough in its own engagement or understanding enough about the situation to be involved. I think we have a unique opportunity here in which we have, as you said, a very special kind of relationship that's developing with some of the folk at MnDOT. With Jerome Adams, who is the project manager for the 252-94 project, and with Chris Hoberg, who is the public engagement manager for this project, and with a fellow who used to be there, John Tompkins, who kind of brought us to the party. But the idea really was, can we facilitate a conversation between an institution and an agency that really wants to do what needs to be done, and with a community that needs to understand the situation better and be engaged so that the outcomes are at least those that have our input. And one of the things that in our conversation with Jerome and Chris that often comes up is uh, there are complex issues on the table. There's different points of view on the table. At the end of the day, nobody is perhaps going to be happy with all the decisions that are made, but we absolutely need to be involved in the discussion. So we're grateful about that, Al. And as you know, we also have asked some very important community folk to join us in this discussion on an ongoing basis. We have what we call a leadership council that's made up of pastors and lay leaders in churches and congregations that in one way or another are fully impacted by this project. And on today, we have with us also my dear sister Hortense Holly, who's here representing her pastor in the extraordinary church, New Salem Missionary Baptist Church. We have a fellow I call the Arizona Razorback, one of the greatest voices and one of the best preachers in all the land, the Reverend Dr. Gaither Robinson, who is the pastor of Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. And I hope he'll be able to get on, but we also have Reverend Dr. Francis Tabla with us. He's having some technical problems. I hope he'll be able to fully engage, but he is the pastor of Ebenezer Community Church in Brooklyn Park, one of the largest congregations of West African people in the metropolitan area. So we're happy, Al, to be involved in this dialogue.
Well, I can tell you that I'm so glad that you were connecting with Insight News and Conversations with Al McFarlane for two reasons. One, the information, the discussion is a critical one. It's timely. And as you were saying, I'll say it more directly, Brother Babington, in the past, there have been times where our voices were not heard, our presence was not acknowledged, our input was not allowed or was ignored. And I want to commend the Minnesota Department of Transportation, particularly the leadership of our guest today, Jerome Adams and Chris Holberg, and their leaders, because there is a new intentionality that I think is worth noting and worth lifting up. We think it's a model for the future. How do we properly, fully engage those who have been marginalized for whatever reason in the past, whatever reason it's unacceptable? So we stand here today in conversation around important, decision-making about what kinds of sustainable lives we're going to lead, not only in the arena of transportation, but all the things that are affected by that as well. Health and wellness, economic development, public safety, access, all these things are on the table. And I am glad that this is a forum that allows us to bring those ideas forward, bringing the voices of community with the leadership group that you've assembled, Brother Babington, and with the team at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. So I'm going to let you introduce our guest and sort of go into the areas we want to cover today.
Okay, so let me begin, Al, by just asking Jerome, the project manager, a direct question about the overarch of this entire thing, because we have all these agencies of the government, of the state, HHS and the Department of Health and Commerce, etc., and we have transportation, MnDOT, and I think often our thinking about it is pretty sterile. You think about it in terms of roadways and traffic lights. But I think what we found out in our dialogue with Jerome and with Chris is there's something much more substantive on the table. So I just want to ask you, Jerome, if you would just begin by helping us to understand what the mission of MnDOT is.
Yes, thank you, Reverend Al. How are both of you doing today?
Good.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for having us on the show. So I'm going to start with a bland policy statement, and then we'll have a conversation about that. What does that mean? So MnDOT's mission is to plan, build, operate, and maintain a safe, accessible, efficient, and reliable multimodal transportation system that connects people to destinations and markets throughout the state, regionally, and around the world. So that's the policy statement. Now, what does that mean? And buried in there is this word multimodal. What does that word mean? So what that means is that MnDOT works on transportation, and that includes roads and bridges, it includes railroads, it includes ports, and airports. And in doing those, that includes passenger vehicles, freight vehicles, it includes pedestrians, it includes Americans with disabilities, and that is kind of our core mission. Specifically on this project, MnDOT is in charge of operating I-94 and Highway 252. And so because we're in charge of operating I-94 and 252, it's our job to make sure that we maintain them and improve them as needed. And then one little factoid I throw out there, some people don't realize that MnDOT, one of its functions is to operate as a big bank. And so what we do as a state transportation agency is we funnel the federal transportation dollars through MnDOT, and we help get that money to local governments, such as counties and cities, so they can pay for the roads and bridges that they operate as well.
Dr. Robinson, you have a thought? You have to unmute yourself.
I was just wondering, I got a question here, and about this project that deals with 252 and I-94 between Brooklyn Park and downtown. And I was just wondering if you could tell us why this is the focus of the project.
Yes, Reverend Robinson, thank you very much for that question. So why are we working in this area? And so in general, the project has been identified that it starts in the south at 4th Street North and I-94 in Minneapolis, goes to the north onto 252, all the way up to where 252 hits Highway 610. So why are we working there? I think that's the question. Well, you know, projects like this and of this size don't just appear overnight. And so it all starts with, you know, we identify some of the needs, and some of the needs are that there's a crash problem, there's difficulty for pedestrians to cross Highway 252, there's connectivity problems. Those are just some of the needs. And studies like that even started in 2014. And so Brooklyn Center as a city really led starting looking at doing something to Highway 252. And Brooklyn Center did a study from 2014 to 2016 to look at what they could do on Highway 252 in Brooklyn Center, and they came up with several alternatives there. And they tried to lobby for some money to do some work. But it doesn't end there. So then we have project partners. We try to work with the surrounding cities, Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park, and Hennepin County started to take a lead role. So Hennepin County then initiated an environmental assessment to say, let's look at all of 252, not just Brooklyn Center, but also Brooklyn Park. And so from 2016 through 2018, 2019, Hennepin County really led an effort to look at what can we do to make 252 a better highway and better for the cities. Well, as we do that work, we realize that as we make improvements to Highway 252, it affects I-94 just to the south. So the next question becomes, well, how far south on 94 should we go? And in our analysis, we determined that a lot of the traffic does exit there at 4th Street North, and we could stop the project there, and we really didn't need to go further to the south on to 394 or the Lowry Tunnel. Does that make sense, Reverend Robinson?
Yes, that makes sense to me. I was just a little bit concerned about all of the, once this project starts, all of the traffic that's going to be over on Lindale in that area. And that's going to affect us because our folks will be trying to get to church, and with all that, with a detour like that, it's going to get kind of difficult because there's a train in the way.
Yes.
Has that been considered?
Yes, and Reverend Robinson, we're definitely going to look at traffic management during construction. Now, the timeline on this project is it's 2021 now, and our goal is to select a preferred alternative by 2024, and then construction we're hoping would start in 2027. Now, preliminary analysis indicates that we should be able to keep traffic running on I-94 during construction, okay? So that should minimize people having to detour onto Lindale, okay? That is our goal, but Reverend, that is a conversation that we want to keep having in 2023 and 24 as we narrow down on that preferred alternative and really talk about, well, how are you going to manage traffic during construction, and how does that impact your parish, your church? And that is definitely a conversation we want to keep having in the future.
You know, I really thanks Reverend Robinson for bringing out that kind of important nuance in this whole discussion. So I'm as you're talking, Jerome, you and Chris, you talk about these goals for the project, these large goals, safety goals, reliable transit goals. But I know that as you are planners, that as you have these goals, you also have sub things, objectives, other targets on the way to the goals. And I'm just wondering, what are the other kind of objectives that you have for this project?
Chris, I'm wondering, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, I think I think the first thing we always start with is kind of identifying what the purpose for the project is going to be, and then trying to identify what we call needs, or essentially issues on the transportation system that need to be addressed or need to be fixed. So if we put it in a high level statement, the purpose of this project is to improve the safe and reliable movement of people and goods on and across highways 252 and 94 across multiple modes of transportation. So it's not just people driving in cars; it's also people walking, biking, rolling, taking transit. Any number of ways that people can get around. We want to make sure that we're turning an eye to those and understand how we can better move people in a safe and efficient manner. Now that kind of leads us into, well, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, right? What are the needs that exist out there? And based on some of the analysis we've done, we've really identified three primary needs for this project. Vehicle safety being one of them. People driving in cars, we know we've got some crash issues on both of these highways. We also know that mobility, or the ability to move people through the corridor, we do see congestion regularly occurring on these highways. So that's also an issue that we want to address. And then bikeability, walkability. This is one that can't be undersold, and this is a place where I would put pedestrian safety or bicycle safety as well in here. Some of the crashes that we see up on 252, for example, involve pedestrians and bicycles, and they're particularly vulnerable users of the transportation system. So these are kind of the needs that we've identified and kind of taken out for some dialogue with the public to hear back the folks' thoughts on whether we're looking in the right place, or if there's other things that we should be adding into the mix here. But those are the two primary categories where we start, and then from there, now we get into kind of some project objectives or high level things that help inform our decision making, are guided as well. One of the things that we identified is we want to achieve equitable social, environmental, and economic outcomes as a part of this project. So that's kind of a goal that isn't necessarily rooted in a transportation issue, but we understand that there's a connection between our project or the investments that we'll make and the social environment, the natural environment, and the economic environment. So those are things that we want to key into when we're making decisions. Obviously, reducing injuries and fatalities on these roadways is a key consideration, just knowing the accident history that we have. And then additionally, are there things that we can do with our transportation investment that help promote public health, improving walkability and bikeability on and across the highway, is one thing that we look at there. Obviously, one of the things I want people to understand about this project is it's not just a discussion about repairing pavement and bridges or replacing the pavement and bridges that exist, but to address some of the problems that we see out here, we're going to be looking at ways to ways to improve that by changing elements on the highway, and that's an important thing for folks to understand. So it's not just we're going to go out and make a smoother road again, and that's going to fix all the woes that exist out here. We actually have changes that come along with that, and that could result in property acquisition. We want to minimize that as much as we can, and then ensuring that whatever things we do implement and the solutions that we do bring to the table are consistent with local agency planning and the roadway network that are out there today. We don't want to be breaking the system by making a fix that isn't sensitive to that context. So those are kind of the project objectives, things that are
You're
helping to
muted,
guide our
Al.
decision making.
You're muted, Al. You're muted, Al.
Fix that. Thank you. Thank you. You saw my lips moving and no words coming.
Your head
I'm
bobbed.
Al McFarlane. You're listening to Conversations with Al McFarlane. And to those who are listening on radio, we're also streaming this live on our YouTube and Facebook pages and at the Facebook page of Black Press USA. Our goal is engagement, to create as many ways for people to learn, to know, to connect, and to engage in building community. And I want to thank my co-host today, Alfred Babington Johnson, who leads the Stair Step Initiative, and thank our guest today, Jerome Adams and Chris Hober, both of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Jerome Adams is MnDOT's project manager for the 252 I-94 project, and Chris worked with him as the public engagement manager for 252 I-94. And so we want to continue the conversation. This is a great conversation. It's wonderful, guys, to be included in the discussion. That's, to me, the value is the intent you bring in having a straight up conversation with an Al McFarlane, with Conversations with Al McFarlane. And I'm here as proxy for the thousands of KFAI listeners, the thousands of people that follow us on Facebook and monitor us on other social media platforms, and who engage through the work of the church community that the Stair Step Foundation represents and beyond. So I want to bring another question in. You mentioned, Chris, among many things, this notion of equitable outcomes. I want to dig deeper on that. When you say we want to have equitable outcomes, what do you mean? Give me some examples. Go deep with that, if you would, Chris.
Well, I think if we look at it on a high level, it means striving for solutions to these transportation problems we're talking about that don't leave historically underserved or overburdened populations disproportionately shouldering project impacts, right? Like that's just a high level thing that we're striving for. But I think there's also kind of a next step that comes along with that, and that's trying to understand, okay, are there disparities that exist? One, and two, within that context, the context of transportation investment disparities, what are the community's priorities? The communities that exist alongside these roadways, what are their priorities? We need to understand that to help inform kind of the decisions that we need to make about what to build. So, I think taking that next step and trying to understand that is an important part of this conversation. And we've come up with a tool that we're looking to bring to bear here and create a venue for a dialogue about health impacts and equity along the corridor, and give us an idea of how these decisions or what should be part of our decision making when we go down this path. So we have a group of neighborhood advisors we're bringing together to help guide this effort. We really want them to help us oversee the equity and health engagement associated with it, to help us understand what are the equity and health conditions that currently exist, how transportation can kind of fit into that, how what are opportunities and what our priorities should be when we're looking at these things, and provide input to our leadership and elected officials about project elements, alternatives, and how fitting within that lens that this group kind of helps develop. So I think, again, when we talk about equitable outcomes, it's about understanding It's about understanding benefit and impact and disparities that exist, and how transportation can play a role in moving barriers to good health or barriers to equity forward.
Let's bring Nini in. You have a question, and you maybe unmute your microphone. And welcome to the program. What's your question or comment?
Well, thank you very much. I do use this quarter quite a bit, between 252 and 94. So safety is always a concern. But is there, along this stretch of highway, is there more safety concerns than other places? Is it more dangerous than usual in other areas? And if so, why?
Thank you for the question, Amy. The short answer is yes. That's the short answer. Yes, it's more dangerous. Now, what does that mean? How can I break that down? So on Highway 252, there was a total of 1,512 crashes. And of those, 654 reported intersection crashes between 2016 and 2019, so a 3-year period. But again, what do those numbers mean? The fact is, Highway 252 ranks as one of the highest crash roadways in the state. What we know is there are 6 signals on Highway 252, and of those 1,512 crashes in that 3-year period, half of them occurred at 66th Avenue or 85th Avenue. And that makes sense because those are the first signals that you encounter on otherwise it's freeways on either end. And crashes do include 6 fatalities. That means 6 people died between 2003 and 2015, and 2 people died between 2016 and 2019 for a total of 8 deaths there. So people are dying on this highway. And then to really kind of frame it, all 6 signalized intersections are in the top 100 worst signalized intersections in the state of Minnesota. And 66th Avenue signal is ranked the 2nd worst intersection in the state. So yes, 252 is more dangerous than many highways in Minnesota.
So to follow up on Nini's second question, could you just say more about the why part of that, Jerome?
The why there are crashes?
Why it's more dangerous?
Right. That's a big question. And I think part of the answer in there is population growth. And maybe if we use the analogy of a child, when you have a baby, you start them in the crib, and a crib works just fine. But that baby grows up and they're bigger than the crib, so we need to move them into a twin bed. And then they grow up and the twin bed is too small, and now you need to get them a bigger bed and a bigger bedroom and stuff like that. It's growth, okay? The highway is kind of the same. Traffic signals are actually very, very safe, but they're safe for a certain amount of traffic. And as that traffic grows, the signals can start to become unsafe, and we've reached that point on Highway 252. And so we now have to look at what can we do with those at-grade intersections and signals with the growth that we've seen in the area. And the growth is both in Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, and Brooklyn Park. And of course, it is also growth that is happening in the outer suburbs like Blaine or city of Anoka and whatnot. But there's definitely growth in all of those cities, including Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, and Brooklyn Park.
Wow, that's very, very helpful in a sense, just to think about. I mean, and thank you for that analogy about the crib to the twin bed to the twin. Do you ever get to a king size bed?
I'm there now.
But I mean, that's very helpful, Jerome, to think about the issue of growth itself. The highway was built at a time when there was less population, and as it grows, it has to mature, or that's for that. It's very helpful. Let me ask you about this, because I know this is something that you and Chris have also infused into some of our discussions. It's the issue of impact on health issues. And I think by and large, we think about transportation and highways very, very simplistically. So when you start talking about things like Al asked about equitable outcomes or health impacts or what have you, you have to maybe help us in the same way you just did about the growth impact. How does the highway impact health issues?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about health, Reverend Babington, is it's a really broad topic, right? In the context of a highway project, it can mean a lot of things, even within that kind of specified context. So it can mean something like a person's physical safety, right? When you're driving in a car or riding your bike or even walking on the sidewalk. It can mean improving access to recreational resources like a park or the Mississippi River in this context, providing high quality facilities that promote active transportation, people moving and walking and getting from place. That can be a boon to better health. It also, we know that most cars are producing exhaust when they're driving up and down the road, and that can affect air quality, and cars create noise, and those are things that we need to be considering when we're thinking about potential changes to the highway. So air quality, that's a direct tie to respiratory health and asthma and things like that. So all of these are things that we have in our minds when we're thinking about making an improvement, and it's important to understand as well that just because we can make an improvement to one thing doesn't mean that that's also improving something else, and sometimes they might work in opposition to each other within the context of health. So the conversation of health and highway infrastructure or infrastructure investment is a very complicated one, and again it's sometimes at its own odds depending on how you're looking at it, and that's all part of what we need to evaluate with these different alternatives, and part of why we're hoping that this equity and health assessment is going to help better round out our understanding of what's important to these communities alongside the highway. What can we focus in on? So as we make decisions, we have a full picture there, and those decisions are informed decisions.
Just to follow up that a little bit, Chris, you say doing equity and health assessments. What does that mean really?
Sure. Yeah,
and Chris, I'm gonna have you explain that in a second. I just had a thought I wanted to add into this conversation before you explain the EHA. And one of the risks that Chris and I have is we can be on this radio show and we can sound like we know everything. And one of the reasons why we're working with StairStep is that we acknowledge that not only may we have a blind spot, but the government may have a blind spot with the community. And so we're working with StairStep to ask the question, is there something we don't know? And especially in this equity and health area, maybe exactly an area where there's something we don't know, and we're asking StairStep and the public, is there something about this project or an equity health we don't know and something we should look at? So Chris, in the previous 2 minutes there, said several things that we do look at, but we're definitely asking StairStep in the community, is there something we're missing that we should pay attention to? With that, Chris, can you explain what this equity health assessment is?
Yeah. The equity and health assessment is a tool that we've kind of developed, again, to try and create a venue to have conversations with people that have a direct connection to the communities alongside the highway about equity issues and health issues that exist, and how transportation intersects with that, and how a potential project could advance one or another thing or several priorities alongside it. So there's a couple of tools that we base the development of this on. One is an equity lens, which is really a kind of a list of questions that are intended to center the mind on equity-centric consequences of a project or a policy, kind of understanding the disparities that exist, understanding how your project or policy could contribute to or help fight against the disparities that exist, and then a health impact assessment, which is another tool which forms that kind of discussion around health and provides some structure and methodology to the effort. So that's where we kind of get this equity and health neighborhood advisors group to help steer us and guide our engagement efforts and inform the EHA and how it progresses. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but I sure hope so.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Alan McFarlane. This is Conversations with Alan McFarlane. Today's program we call the Stairstep MnDOT Town Hall, and we're discussing the project for the redoing of Highway 252 and I-94. It's an important corridor. It covers and goes through the Black community in North Minneapolis in particular, but also Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, two communities that have a substantial Black, African-American, African immigrant populations. And what's significant to me in having this discussion, from my point of view as a communicator, it's one of the first times that the department has been extremely intentional in reaching out and creating a discussion, seeking feedback, seeking testimony, seeking challenges, as a matter of fact, with the intent of ensuring that all interests are being considered, being lifted, and that the best decisions can be made to create or to undertake the stated mission that is improving, transportation and access, as our guest stated today. I want to thank our guest, both Jerome Adams, who is the project manager for the 252 I-94 project, and Chris Holberg, who is MnDOT's public engagement manager for the 252 I-94 project. And I always want to thank my colleague and partner, Alfred Babington Johnson, for creating this opportunity and co-hosting with me today. And I want to also acknowledge and thank Reverend Gaither and Sister Hortense Holly and other members of the community leadership team that have been engaged with you over a long period of time, trying to ensure that ordinary residents of our community, that members of our congregations are up to speed, are understanding that their voices and their interests matter, and that you all are providing with intention a listening ear, seeking to create the best alternatives for our community in this important work. And I want to go back to something that you guys mentioned early on. I think Jerome, either you or Chris, talked about in developments like this, it could be that there is a need to acquire property. And the fact is, too often, cities or states or the federal government have disproportionately impacted low-income people or people that seem to have less power when they make property acquisition decisions. What are you talking about? I mean, I'm looking at Rondo, for example. I'm looking at North Minneapolis, where I-94 came in. These were Black neighborhoods that were decimated, people who were displaced, and typically without warning or notice, and simply generally without their being able to voice an objection or to participate in the decisions that altered their community and their lives forever. This is different because it seems to me, Jerome and Chris and Brother Babington, there's an intentionality in ensuring that all voices are heard. So the question I ask is, go into how you are approaching this question of the possibility of having to acquire property. Should Black people be feeling like they're at risk again, or should white people be feeling like they're at risk? How do you manage the risk of residents in the community who may be impacted by decisions to acquire their property to create the best outcome for the entire community? Who wants to take that on, Jerome or Chris?
Yep. I'll take that one. And again, thank you, Al and Reverend Babington, for inviting us on this radio show and asking these questions. These are very important questions. And we want to work with the public in showing the pros and cons of the alternatives we're going to consider. And, again, I mentioned schedule again. We're hoping to pick a preferred alternative in 2024. So we're starting a 3-year journey where we're going to do public engagement and show alternatives to the public and really explain pros and cons of different alternatives. And you're going to start seeing alternatives here coming out in September and this fall and whatnot. So I think what you said, Al, is how do you manage right-of-way acquisition? And I think the word equity comes in here, and doing public engagement is key. How do we manage informing the public if we're doing something unequitable versus equitable? And we do that through public engagement events like this and showing the public what each alternative does. Let's start, Al, by explaining that the governor of Minnesota and the commissioner of transportation acknowledge that the government has participated in systemic racism. And when I say the government, that's the federal government across the United States, and that's the Minnesota government in the state of Minnesota, and even our cities and counties. So they acknowledge the government has participated in systemic racism. And they want to make sure that on all projects going forward, and definitely this project, that we're not perpetuating that history of systemic racism. So you just mentioned Rondo. So, you know, what exactly in right-of-way acquisition does systemic racism mean? It means that the government decides we're going to target a very specifically Black neighborhood, and we're going to demolish their homes so that we can preserve homes of white people. Okay, so that's systemic racism, and we do not want to repeat that. So how do we manage that? We do public engagement, and we show alternatives to the public, and we show the impacts and the benefits of each alternatives so that you can make decisions with us on what makes sense. So again, we've been studying this project since 2014, and one of the first rounds of conclusions was made in 2016. And back in 2016, a conclusion was, let's put in interchange at 66th Avenue. And in doing that, we identified that there would probably be around 10 relocations at 66, okay? Well, in 2016, you know, rightfully, those citizens complained and said, hey, I don't like that. Can't you put this interchange somewhere else? So we continue to study it through 2018 and 2019 of, can we put interchanges somewhere else? Can we put it at 70th? Can we put it at 73rd? And we're going to do that again in more detail over the next 3 years through 2024. So MnDOT, with StairStep's help, and doing public engagement, we do want you to pay attention to these alternatives we're putting out. We'll give you the raw data, you know, this alternative takes this many homes, and this alternative takes this many homes, and this one takes that many homes. Then we have to do this equity piece. Okay, well, it's not just raw numbers. Of those homes that each alternative could take, are you disproportionately impacting the BIPOC community? Are you disproportionately impacting another community? And we got to very carefully consider those. So it may be a situation that I want to remind everyone that equity does not mean equal. So, for example, this is a hypothetical. There could be an alternative that takes more property than another alternative. But when we look at the alternative that takes less property, maybe we find out that that seems to target the BIPOC community. And we go, well, wait a second, is that fair? Or would it be more fair to actually pick the alternative that maybe takes more property, but theoretically doesn't target the BIPOC community? So again, these are all hypotheticals. Over the next 3 years, we hope you walk with us as we show you alternatives and show you these impacts, and we can see the difference between just raw number of property takings and versus who's being impacted. I think I will say, as we are not talking about a Rondo neighborhood situation where we're taking out city blocks. We are not talking about that. So again, I threw out a number. One alternative had 5 residential homes that would have to be relocated. Another had 10. So we're in that area. Mm-hmm. We're not in city blocks worth of relocations.
Got
You
it.
know,
Thank you.
this is a very helpful conversation, as Al has indicated on more than one occasion. And some of it is for us to understand the high level thinking, the concepts that are involved. And another is to understand some of the lingo, some of the language that you're putting forward, and so that when you're saying spoon, we recognize you're actually talking about something that could help us with our cereal. So I'm wondering though, you said alternative. That's been something that's mentioned several times. You also said, I think, elements. And so can you help us with some of the lingo of that, and definitionally and impact as best you feel it?
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. And this is one of the tougher questions because we got lingo for miles, right? And I could just throw jargon at you. And so we're trying to figure out how do we explain this so it isn't laden with all this jargon and stuff. So the bottom line is we want to pick one project that we can build. That's the goal, okay? So we're going to consider alternatives. And what does that mean? And those alternatives are made of elements. What does that mean? So let's start with elements. And, you know, analogies do get a little bit clumsy, but we could sit here and say the elements are ingredients and the alternative is the actual recipe, okay? But we don't know if we're making a Mexican dish or a cake or we're making a steak. So, you know, we have to figure that out.
If you're making a steak, could you give me a call?
I will give you a call. I like steak too. So
Yeah,
we should definitely go ahead, Chris.
I would, you know, I look at it like if you think about a different intersection design at one location, that would be like an element, okay? Or a pedestrian bridge at another location, that would be a different element. A specific type of transit service up and down the corridor would be another element. And what you do is you come up with all the different elements that you can think of and combine them in different ways to come up with a particular alternative. And then you can weigh that alternative against, well, what does that mean for the needs that we have on the project and our project purpose? How is that alternative advancing resolution to these transportation problems that happen? And what are the benefits and what are the impacts? And then you can stack up all these different alternatives that you've put together from 50 different pieces and put them next to each other and understand, you know, what are the benefits of each and what are the impacts of each. And from that, then you can kind of start to see there's going to be some that rise up and some that fall away. And of the ones that rise up, now you start to get a little bit more granular in your understanding, and you look at things on a deeper level and start to see, well, this one has this performance and this one has that performance, and eventually you whittle yourself down to that preferred alternative, the right thing to build based on all the different criteria that you're looking at this through, and what your objectives are, and how you're correcting the deficiencies that exist.
Yep, very good. That was well said, Chris. Let's do some specific examples, because I think one of the comments is, quit beating around the bush. What are you going to do already? So let's talk about some elements. So some elements could be, should we leave at-grade intersections on 252? What does at-grade mean? It means the traffic signals right now have two streets crossing at the same level, okay? So should we continue to have intersections like the signals on 252? That's one element. Another element would be, can we get rid of the signal and build bridges over 252 or 252 over the local roads and create a freeway? So that would be another element.
Don't forget, Jerome, we can change the configuration of those intersections as well as alternatives for consideration as well. So just because you have those two roads coming together, right now they're configured in a certain way, you can change those configurations and get some different characteristics as well. So that's something that needs to be considered.
Well said, Chris. So then, even with all those different elements, another set of elements is, how many lanes should we have on 252? Should it be 4 lanes total? Should it be 6 lanes total? That's another set of elements, okay? So there we just threw out some ingredients, some elements. Now we go cut to the chase. What's the actual alternative? So again, if you look at the 2016 study, which again, we have this on the MnDOT website, or the 2018 public engagement, you'll see some of the alternatives that were done there. So one was, let's get rid of all 6 signals and let's put an interchange at 66, an interchange at Brookdale Drive, and an interchange at 85th.
Interchange means what, Jerome?
Sorry, that's putting a bridge over 252. So like, you know how 252 and 694 cross each other with a bridge and ramps?
Mhm.
That's an interchange. So thank you for asking that question, Reverend. Again, more jargon and whatnot. That's a good question. So that would be one alternative. Get rid of all the signals, put a bridge at 66th Avenue, a bridge with ramps at Brookdale Drive, and a bridge with ramps at 85th Avenue. So there are other alternatives. So one of the comments was, but we don't want an interchange or bridge and ramps at 66. So can you put it at 70th or 73rd? So yes, that's another alternative. Okay, let's move the bridge to 70th, or let's move the bridge to 73rd. And so those are examples of some alternatives that were looked at in the past. We'll look at them again through the next 3 years. And another step that we're going to do is ask, is there an idea or alternative that we're missing? Should we consider another alternative? So again, I do think the public is kind of getting to the point of cut to the chase and tell us already what you're going to do. So come September and into this fall, we're actually going to start showing you, here are some alternatives we're considering. What do you think? And again, remember, it is going to take some time. We have a 3-year process to really go through all of that and their benefits and impacts. And hopefully we can pick one of those alternatives in 2024 for something to build.
Jerome, you talked about the elements at 252. What are some of the elements for I-94? Same scenario. Tell us what the options or elements are for I-94.
That's a really good question. Thank you. You know, we have a lot of this focus on 252 because the crashes are really up on 252, and the ability to cross 252 is really hard. 94 doesn't have those problems as much, but again, what we do on 252 impacts 94, as we discussed at the top of the hour. So what are we doing on 94? So first of all, I want to jump back to that right away question. So far in the last 5 years, when we've looked at alternatives, we did not see any property acquisition on I-94 or in Minneapolis, okay? All the property acquisition was along 252, either in Brooklyn Center or Brooklyn Park. So right there, that kind of indicates that any work we're thinking of doing on 94, we actually think 94 is left kind of as it is, meaning all the bridges you see there today remain. All the ramps connecting to the freeway remain. So what are the things that we might do? So one of the things that we might do is we might add a lane in each direction between Dowling Avenue and 694. And you would ask, why would we do that? One, if you look at 94, it's actually 5 lanes in each direction south of Dowling, but north of Dowling, it's 4 lanes in each direction, okay? Then when we make an improvement on 252, we got to ask ourselves, how do those lanes from 252 mesh with the lanes of 94 to continue on? And one of the options was, it looks like we should really add that 5th lane in each direction between Dowling and 694. So then when you talk about adding lanes, one of the needs we did not discuss is that transit is in fact a key part of the needs and the purpose of this project. So we want to make sure we're looking at transit improvements, both on 94 and 252, but also locally in the local streets. So if I say we might add a lane on 94, and again, this is an alternative, it's not a decision. The question is, well, is that just a general purpose lane, and that means just a lane that, you know, all cars and trucks can use? Or do we make that lane a managed lane? What does a managed lane? Now, this is a little bit confusing because we just changed some names. I don't know if you noticed this, but have you seen the min-pass lanes around the metro? you'd see a sign and it says MinPass, MNPASS. We just changed the name MinPass to Easy Pass, okay? The bottom line is when those are signed, those are express lanes. And those lanes are open to all users 20 hours of the day. But during the 4 hours of the peak rush hour, it becomes what we call a high occupancy vehicle lane, or if you're one person in a car, you would have to pay a fee to use it, okay? But that's only 4 hours a day. If you're in a high occupancy vehicle, what does that mean? That means you're on a bus, or you're in a carpool, or you're just in a car with more than one person. So it can be your own car you own, and you just have a second person in the lane. You can use that lane during those 4 hours of rush hour for free, as long as you have more than one person in that car. But if you want to drive that lane with only one person during those 4 hours of rush hour, then yes, we say you need to pay a fee, and the average is around $1.25 in rush hour. So we're going to consider, should we be a managed lane like that? And that helps improve transit, because that managed lane actually is less congested than the other lanes. And so buses use it. So if you're a bus user, you have a more reliable trip, because the buses usually move faster along those lanes than the congested lanes next to you. So your question was, what are we doing along 94? My answer is, it's more or less going to look exactly the same. The bridges are pretty much going to be left alone. The freeway ramps are going to be pretty much left alone. And we have to ask this question, are we putting a managed lane on it, or are we putting something to a lane for buses to use, so that they can easily get into downtown Minneapolis?
The other part to that, sorry, I don't want to forget that we have improvements to the crossings that we have to look at as well. Are there non-motorized connections that there's a need there? There's a variety of other elements that go along with that, not just focused on freeway specific, but also
like substance for another show, Al. You're running out of time.
We're out of time almost, but I want to take a quick second, Chris and Jerome, just because it's so important that these plans include transit elements like biking, roller skating, and walking. So just take 30 seconds or a minute to say how you figure that into the matrix of creating effective transportation and access.
Yep. Do you want me to tackle that, or you, Chris?
why don't you go ahead? I can augment if need be.
Right. So this is incredibly important, Al. Thanks for asking this question. We need to make sure that pedestrians, people on foot, bicycles, or the handicapped, maybe in wheelchairs, can both cross I-94 and 252 safely. And again, the biggest crash problem and pedestrian problem is 252. It is dangerous to cross those signals, okay? And pedestrians and bikes have been hit at those signals. So one way we can help that is, if we eliminate a signal at an intersection, we could install just a pedestrian bridge and have those pedestrians and bikes go up and over, just like there's a pedestrian bridge at 85th Avenue right now. Or if we create an interchange, so a car roadway bridge going over 252, we can make sure there are good sidewalks on both sides of that vehicle bridge that allow pedestrians to cross 252. And again, they're not physically having to dart around traffic on 252 because they're going over it or under it.
Let me jump in. We got 30 seconds left. Chris, you've got some meetings coming up. You want people to know about, take 30 seconds and invite people to weigh in.
Yep, absolutely. We've got about 15 pop-ups scheduled in the next couple months here. Those are just meetings where we try and meet people where they're at, be that at the grocery store, at an event going on in the community. Typically not advertised, but we also have some upcoming online open house material coming out, and we're planning on some meetings in that September timeframe. I would also say that we have a policy advisory committee meeting coming up on August 20th. People are invited to go ahead and listen in on that. You can find all
Looks
that
like we're
information
over, Chris,
on our
website. Yeah, so just Google MnDOT 252, and you'll find the website.
We're out of time. Brother Babington, thank you so much for your leadership. And thank you, Pastor Gaither and Sister Holly. Thank you to our guests from MnDOT. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
God bless you.
It's time, it's time, it's time. I know it's time. The generation of reparation. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparation. Especially ours, you know it's due. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparation. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Reparations for building this nation. Lynching and burning castration. Selling children, family separation. Right now, time for reparations. Millions of slave ships landed with chained and branded.